Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome to another of our Managing Your Small Business Beyond the Pandemic. This is number 83. I'm Kelly Bearden, and I'm with the California State University Bakersfield Small Business Development Center, also known as CSUB EDU, CSUB SBDC. So, almost try to give you the web address as I sit here and spin. So, a little bit about what we do here at the Small Business Development Center. One thing that we do is that we do a variety of issues. We do one-on-one consulting and actually a lot of different programs. One of them we'll get into today is on the COVID EIDL program, and we'll be talking about it with you, along with other things that we do on our 83rd webinar that is really kind of like an extended look into a lot of the pandemic programs. So here's the changes that have happened, and changes that we've been talking about a lot on Wednesday ever since they happened, and really a lot ever since a lot of the changes have been really enforced. And really, the cap being increased to $2 million is kind of the big one that kind of came out and allowed a lot more people to participate in this particular program. So what we started to see was that there was an exclusivity period that ended on October the 8th, whereas if you got your EIDL loan into up to 500,000, they would be considered before the large $2 million ones. So people could start applying for $2 million back on October 8th. And it's really been kind of the issue that we ran into with the PPP, and that is, are there going to be funds available? How long are EIDL funds going to last? And really, I can tell you as late as within the last hour, a call that I was on with SBA, and SBA's position on that is the program is going to be open until December 31st, 2021, or until funds run out. They do not anticipate or have an anticipated date when they think funds might run out as of the last hour. So obviously, if you're looking to increase the size of an existing EIDL, our position is to do it as quickly, as fast as possible. Over here in Ridgecrest, and I've been talking to a number of businesses over here about this very same topic, been jumping into the platform and other ways of actually going through those changes. So in addition to the size of the EIDL increasing, one thing that's really important also is funds can be used for many more uses. And really one of the more important one is going to be, it can be applied to commercial and regularly scheduled federal debt. So if you have credit cards, if you went through a business credit cards for that reason, if you went through a online lender, or you have higher rates of interest on a particular loan, now is your time to take these funds that were originally emergency funds. COVID-19 funds for EIDL were emergency funds that were basically out there to really survive with working capital and pay your notes that you needed to pay during that time. But now we're transitioning now to making your business stronger. And we're recovering to the recovery phase. And that recovery phase actually now is allowing you to make your business stronger by resetting some of those higher debt limits and actually making it easier to actually cash flow your business over the next 24 months or even longer. Since these loans go up to 30 years, really you're cash flowing your business better in a more favorable position over potentially a 30-year term. So the other thing that helps from a cash flow perspective, and you know I'm all about cash flow, is that the deferment is for 24 months after the loan origination. And that can be adjusted. So if you get an increase in your EIDL, so let's say you get it today, all of a sudden now you're going out 2 years when you can actually defer that loan until 2 years, which is going to be October 12th, 2023. So there are some requirements for larger businesses or affiliated businesses that we will not jump into. But basically, this program now is open toward larger small businesses and medium small businesses that have over 500 employees. So for those that were kind of shut out, because SBA is a program, SBA funding programs, including even our business consulting program, is for businesses that have 500 employees or less. So when the size standards are exceeded, then you really can't take advantage of SBA programs, which of course EIDL is one of. But they've made some changes to accommodate businesses that are more medium-sized businesses or larger small businesses. But really, they're really medium businesses. And as long as they don't have over 500 employees per location, they're able to, and no more than 20 locations, they're able to take advantage of this program if they're in the certain NAICS codes identified under number 5 on your screen right there. So that's big, and it also then goes up to $10 million. So you can get essentially 5 $2 million loans for those that have 5 separate locations. So the EIDL terms have changed as well. Not so much the interest rate, it's still 3.7%, and it's still a repayment period of 30 years. The deferment now goes to 24 months for basically for all loans, and that is from the latest activity from what I understand. So the minimum credit score has gone down. It has gone down to 570 for loans that are less than $200,000. And it actually is up to, it's down to 625 for larger size loans. And again, really it's the uses, and the uses of these programs is it can be used for working capital purposes as it always has done, but what we call the COVID-19 EIDL loan program is also available for inventory, raw material, and the commercial debt and federal debt are the big ones on this particular. So what you could have done up until October the 8th is to apply up to that $500,000 limit and then sought funding beforehand and still been in that exclusivity time frame that ended. But since the time frame has ended, it's the Old West. It's get in and get your money while you can. It's let's see what we can do and move on from there. So also some of the application details. Timeline is basically 3 weeks for the smaller deals. The larger deals, it looks like 6 weeks. So required documents, and the required documents are going to need to be uploaded in order to get your process going. And we've talked a lot on this webinar, a lot about some of the issues that we've had. We've had a lot of issues that have happened in a variety of different areas. So those areas could have been anything from typos or getting a digit wrong, but everything is being really well checked out. During the early days of EIDL, a lot of those loans were not even underwritten. We're running into situations to where people got a $150,000 loan, and in some circumstances, in some situations, they're not able to get a larger EIDL. And it was because of the government's interest in getting those emergency EIDL loans, those emergency funds during the shutdown phase of the COVID experience that we've had over the last 18 months, and get as much as that into the hands of individuals as they can. But you're going to need your federal taxes, and you're going to need, of course, the IRS Form 4506T. Some of the additional requirements that you're going to need are, for larger, you're going to need a standard resolution, which is, if you're a corporation, you have to have, basically a corporate seal attached, and a corporation, you have to have the permission for the corporation to borrow. So they'll need that resolution. It can't be the majority stakeholder of that taking it on, or it can't be a minority. It can't be one of your partners. It needs to be, since the corporation is its own entity, it needs to come from it. Really, one of the things that helps SBA underwrite these loans is to find out how extended you are and what your liabilities are. Now, on this Form 2202, which is a schedule of liabilities, if you have a lot of things I think that don't show up on here, and things that I think are important to note, and that might be, a monthly obligation that you have for rent. So if you have a extended period that you owe for rent, that is going to be a liability that is going to be owed by you. If you're out of business, you're still going to be required or still be expected to make that rent payment. So you're going to need to supply a list of schedule of liabilities. So list a lot of what you have as far as your payables, your notes payables. And so one of the things I see get overlooked a lot is the cumulative balance of that rent payment that is due, depending on the term of your loan and where you are, or term of your lease and where you are on that lease. Also a list of the real estate owned, and also the SBA Form 413, the personal financial form, will be required as well. And kind of that takes us through the application details. So what I'm going to do is try to do a new share and see if PowerPoint really would like to participate in today's webinar, or if they want to continue to give me a bad time. So really, we kind of got to that point. We got to it kind of backwards by kind of working within our tech issue that we're running through. But really, what I really wanted to do is give you kind of an update date now on where we plan on going with the webinar the next 2 weeks. And next week, we're going to have Megan Hodap, and she is the Small Business Finance Manager for the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development through their iBank, which is their Infrastructure and Economic Development Bank, talking about the small business loan programs that they provide. And then on October 27th, a really solid look like we had earlier when we had guest Michael Stevenson on, who's a CPA with the Lee CPA accountancy firm of Barbich, Hooper, King, Dill, and Hoffman. So those are what is coming up. Today, where we're going to go the rest of it, we just got our EIDL update and did our poll, and we have questions. The question box is open. A couple things that are going on that I really want to talk about, and that is what's kind of the California Relief Grant funding. Now, if you received the California Relief Grant, you're done. A lot of people, as I've heard there's literally in the state of California tens of thousands of individuals who have been approved but have not found that email. So if you applied for a California Relief Grant, that email could have gone to your junk folder. It could have gone to your clutter box. It could have gone to wherever your inbox isn't and what you're kind of seeing. So really, we're really trying to get people, after 7 of those requests and 7 of those emails that come from lindustry.com, again, you're looking at lindustry.com, and if you've received 7 of those, in the next week, they're going to start making inactive those funds and reappropriate those for other individuals. Lindustry said this morning on a call that they were going to continue funding California Relief Grant until the middle part of December. And a lot of it is going to come from individuals who have already filled out an application that can go back as far as December 30th. You could have forgot about it. Could have been a partner of yours that actually did it. Could have been somebody who is no longer affiliated with the business. I hope it's not somebody who went through this with actually the COVID disease. But anyway, there's a lot of different reasons and variations on why they have not gone through and completed the paperwork. Because remember, when you get the California Relief Grant approved, there's still completed paperwork and a follow-up that needs to be done before you get that check of $5,000, $15,000, or $25,000. So if you had applied and did not receive that, please check your email and check your junk email. And what you want to do is run a search from Lindustry, Lendistry. Lindustry also announced they really didn't provide us a lot of details because I guess they know about Webinar Wednesday, and we would have spilled them all right here, but there is a venues program coming out from the state of California, and it will be out tomorrow. It'll be to a maximum of $250,000. I believe you will be eligible even if you received the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant from the SBA. So please note, there is for cultural institutions, our museums and our other venues that have been shuttered, there is a California Venues program that is coming out. We'll have more details on it next week on our webinar 84 on webinar on October the 20th. Also coming out that's not out yet is for micro businesses, small businesses that maybe have a business that is a lot of their income, and still they weren't able to either apply or do anything. There's a California micro grant that's coming out. We'll have the information on that. And do remember to please put your questions in the particular question box. So apparently we've gone through the EIDL stuff already, and we will touch on some of the employee retention, but with really a good look coming on that in 2 weeks. That's really where you want to get your ERC information. And kind of have touched on all of these opened particular programs. Here's our one sheet on the EIDL program. And with the EIDL program, we're seeing a lot of people that are going through various steps and various phases. If you are new to EIDL, then go online and you can actually apply for a new EIDL loan. You can still apply even if you haven't done it before. Maybe the terms before didn't appeal to you, that you didn't really want to pay back another loan. But now you see that you might be able to offset interest cost for a higher loan interest rate. And now you can jump in. We're requesting, or we're hoping that people jump in as quickly as possible on that. Again, we don't know when the funds are going to run out. We don't know how long they're going to last. But jump in and save your spot in line if you haven't done an EIDL loan yet. If you want to request a larger EIDL loan, there's 2 ways that you can do that. And one way is to do it from within your very own EIDL portal. So EIDL, again, is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan that is put out by the SBA, and they have a portal that you can go into, and you can see the status of a lot of things happening in that portal. So what you would want to do is, if you are given access to do so, you can actually click in there and actually then go down to a bar and actually scroll the bar over to the amount of funds that you would like to basically request. Now, you're not done when you do that. You still have to provide the documents that we went through earlier when we provided the update on EIDL. So you still need to do those documents, and you still need to upload that particular information. Now, yesterday out here in Ridgecrest, I talked to a client, and we were going through that particular process. And what we found is that it wasn't open to him. So immediately what we did was we called the SBA call center for EIDL. You see the number right here. Call SBA's Customer Service Center, 800-659-2955. We called them, and they said that it wasn't available. If it's not available in your portal, what you need to do is you need to send an email. And whereas we don't have that email on here, we do have a number of the other links that are on here. You see in the chat probably a lot of these are going on. But to request a larger EIDL loan from email, it's on one of our slides coming up, so we'll share it with you then. But here's a checklist that's very helpful if you're going through, particularly if you're going through this process for the first time. And I have talked to a lot of people who originally didn't think they wanted the EIDL. You might be in that situation where you were actually funded or approved for the EIDL, and you were given about 30 days to go through that. If that's your situation, then what you can do is you can go back in and you can go through a reconsideration process. And we'll look at increasing the EIDL and the reconsiderations momentarily. But there's your EIDL customer service number. There's also a lot of FAQs that are very helpful. There's website information there. And so if you're looking at the EIDL and looking at getting a bigger piece of the EIDL pie, as I like to say, that's your information right there. Okay, so moving on, here's kind of some of the same changes that we discussed. Again, a lot of the uses that you can do in order to, if you increase your EIDL. The important thing that I failed to mention earlier when you increase your EIDL, which is why I put this in 2 different places, is that these are changes that are pretty much retroactive, or actually they're very much retroactive. So these uses can go back to an existing EIDL. So if you received a $150,000 EIDL last year, and maybe you only had to use $40,000 of it for emergency purposes, and you're sitting there with a $110,000 EIDL, you can use that for other uses now. You can use that to pay off other commercial debt or credit cards or government-backed debts. So if you have an SBA guaranteed loan, their 7A loan, Or maybe through Mid-State Development, you have a 504 loan. You can use that to make monthly payments. You can't pay in advance on the federal loans, on the federal business loans. You can do it maybe on state business loans, but you can't do it on federal loans. But if you have an existing one that goes back, your uses have now changed too. The SBA considers us out of the emergency. We're out of the emergency EIDL fund portion of this. And we are now on the recovery part. And the recovery is to make our business stronger, make them more resilient as they move forward. We understand that many businesses, most businesses, from what I talk to, are not at where they were in 2019. They are not where they were at the beginning part of 2020 when our economy was smoking. So if you want additional funds, here you go right here. Email COVID EIDL increase request, and that's plural. So it is the COVID and the EIDL, EIDL, increase request at sba.gov. Again, you can go into your portal, and there's your address for the portal. And there you can click a button to request additional funds. You want to also disclose any changes that have happened. If there have been any changes in ownership, any changes in if you've had a bankruptcy, for example, or anything like that, and then submit for consideration. Now, one question I have that I haven't been able to answer yet, but I'm going to give you kind of a temporary answer, is last week we had a transition business specialist on about selling your business. And the question was that came up in the last week from one of our clients. So if you have questions, please ask them, because I love these questions. Is my EIDL loan assumable? So maybe you took the EIDL proceeds and you used it to keep the business going, and you're now selling the business. And couldn't that be included in part of the transaction? And that is something that needs to be approved by SBA. But my understanding is that if you go through a process and you can show that the business is an ongoing concern, has the great possibility to continue, yes, that can actually happen. And, okay, so apparently PowerPoint's messing with me again, so that's fine. I'll just go to something different. One thing that I can go to that's a little bit different is kind of like these EIDL Chrome numbers that we had. And kind of find those for you. Okay. So that's the application details. Let me do a new share for you. And actually, let's kind of move on. Let's look at one thing that I really wanted to, with many of you that haven't actually been forgiven for the first loan. This is something I could pull up and I really want to discuss because we haven't really touched this much. And SBA now has produced a step-by-step guide for appealing PPP forgiveness denials. And I know I have talked with some of you that have had issues with your bank, and maybe this is the proper venue to go through. It's a detailed process. It's not very easy. This will be sent out with our email that comes out, Friday toward the weekend, but there is a process that you can go through, and that is really good news because early on they were saying that a lot of it wasn't going to happen. It was if the PPP process happens one time, and if you don't get what you want, then you have a problem regarding repaying. And now we do have the appeals process, and as you see, one thing regarding the appeals process is you only have 30 calendar days from receipt of the final loan review decision. So once you get that PPP decision, an editorial comment, some people say this would be a good time to hire an attorney. And I think that would depend on the size of the amount that is not being done, but that is definitely something to definitely look at some assistance on this. So there is a website that SBA has, their SBA Office of Appeals and Hearings. What you do is you need to go through the process and in detail, tell them why you are challenging it. And this is an administrative judge that actually handles this, an administrative law judge. So, it is kind of like a very formal process to go through of these 13 steps, but not really getting into a tremendous amount of detail in this because I think it only applies to a few of you. But this is the process that's available and is out there. So the one thing is, you can ask for reconsideration through the SBA, and also there is still an appropriate federal district court if you don't get the answer that you want here. The judge actually comes up with the decision in 45 days. So for those of you that think you need to go through a PPP forgiveness denial process where you were denied forgiveness, either in whole or in part, we do have this step-by-step guide to kind of assist you and can talk you through this particular process. Okay, so let's see what else. What else can I share with you with a very uncooperative PowerPoint today? Well, let's see how PowerPoint wants to work now. And so now it's saying, okay, we'll work. Another thing we ran into with kind of EIDL was this unverified information. And this was a very common problem. And the one thing that's really important, I'm not going to go into more information here, but most of these problems are coming from transposed numbers, different addresses where your business address might be different from what's on your tax return. It could be that your information is coming back slow from the IRS regarding your 4506. But if it is that, if you have not had your tax returns verified from the IRS, you can go to your local office, and we have had individuals that have been able to get them stamped and certified that those are the legitimate copies and then moved up to the IRS, or excuse me, the SBA. The one thing also to recall on your EIDL, if your EIDL is under 25,000, it is unsecured. And basically, when you go through this particular process, you get what is called an LLNA, a loan agreement and authorization, that has your collateral requirements and everything that you need to know about your loan. So one thing that you need to do is you need to actually read through that and make sure that you're not having any particular issues with that particular aspect of it. So on EIDLs, kind of looking back at the numbers, we don't have numbers since September 30th. They usually come out on Wednesday. So this is the second Wednesday of October. So we're hoping to see how big the jump is. Of that EIDL dollars that's available, $270 billion has been spent. My understanding always was it was about $365 billion. But new information that I had received had it closer to $500 billion. So it's one of those two. I believe it's the $500 billion, which really kind of gives hope for a lot more time that's out there. So that's kind of that EIDL report. Okay. Back to the PowerPoint portion of our program. So there's kind of the PowerPoint. There's more information on the slide for that. Let's jump into the forgiveness aspect of it now. So for forgiveness, you have to remember your timelines, and your timelines were up to 24 weeks to use the funds if you elected the extended period of time or covered period, and most people did, and it's an election on your part, or up to December 31st. So from the end of that covered period, then you have, at the end of those 24 weeks, you have a 10-month window from the end of the covered period to apply for forgiveness. Now, this is not a 10-month period to apply for forgiveness. It's just ends the process, and it stops you from receiving invoices from the PPP. Remember, this is a loan, and you sign loan documents. If you do not go through the forgiveness process, this will be termed out as a loan. You do have time, even if you've exceeded that 10-month window from the end of your covered period. It's just that what will confuse things is that you will start getting invoices in the mail to start making payments. So at the end of that 24-month window, you have 60 days from the lender to verify your application, upload it to the SBA portal, and then the SBA has 90 days. So, there's 10 tips that we used to give, and I'm going to go through them one more time, just because I think that they're very valuable. And the one thing is one thing we've said pretty much all along this process of the 10 tips is that you have to remember the intent of the program. The intent was to pay payroll. The Paycheck Protection Program was to cover your employees during a time when you were either shut down or your business was extraordinarily impacted. So the intent being different from the EIDL loan, which is why many of you don't have an EIDL. The PPP process was one that you worked with your lender. And you can work with your lender or whatever their process is for forgiveness, or you can go through the SBA portal. We have gone through the SBA portal on a few different occasions. If that is acceptable by your lender, we're hearing good results from that. Oftentimes lenders created their own method, and so you just really need to continue to work with your lender and work through that particular process. So then the appropriate form for forgiveness will vary between the three forms. There's a form for if your PPP loan is $50,000 or less, which is extraordinarily easy process. It's also $150,000 or less has been made very, very simple to go through the process. It's when you get over that $150,000 threshold when it becomes more difficult. And there's a lot of changes that have occurred in both June of 2020 and at the end of 2020 on the forgiveness process. The one thing that is really important is that you have to certify that you use the funds. They were first of all needed because of COVID-19 and that you spent them accordingly. So originally, payroll was a larger factor than it ended up being, but as that number came down, you'll just have to certify that you used the funds and you needed the money. Those are the really important aspects of that. And again, you can apply for forgiveness once all the money from the loan in which had been spent. And again, you would begin to need payment. So there's some documentation that you run through that's pretty that you really, I think you need to keep on hand. A lot of individuals have either the smaller versions, the under 50,000, where you just need to basically check the box and sign. But really, if you do get audited or you go through some type of financial review down the road, you're going to need to provide this information. Just because you did not provide it at the time of PPP forgiveness does not mean that they will come back and actually ask you to provide the information that was on your PPP forgiveness form. So obviously, you're going to have payroll on there, so you're going to want some form of payroll. However you do your payroll, through a payroll service. Maybe you do your payroll manually still. Maybe you use other softwares or whatever. But however you do it, you're going to need to have some type of reports that document the employees and the employees that you used over that particular period. If you received a second PPP loan, those periods cannot overlap as far as the payroll goes. And that's one thing that we have stressed all along, is that no matter what pandemic relief financial program you receive funds from, almost every one of them have it to where you could only use the funds for one particular program and one particular time. Say, for example, I had multiple programs and my payroll for the month of September just got paid. So for September, I would need to elect either PPP2, shuttered venues, the California Relief Grant, but I can't use a combination of those two in whole. I can't put my entire payroll in PPP2 or also against my EIDL loan. Moving along, again, your lender is the one who is actually controlling this process, and your lender will have you either go through either of the three SBA forms, the 3508, which is about a 12-page form, and then the SBA 38EZ, which was significantly easier, and then the S form was for 50,000 and less. So again, you're documenting and you're getting your information for loan forgiveness. And one of the things that really a lot of our clients were really doing was they were really managing the program for forgiveness in order to apply for the employee retention tax credit. And really, some of these came out after the fact, and we have people that applied for the fourth quarter of 2020 for the ERC, the Employee Retention Credit, and actually had to file amended 941 payroll tax returns for that period to claim that. So a lot of these are occurring after the fact even. Right now, we don't know if the ERC is going to end on 9/30 or if it's going to end on 12/31/2021. It's still projected right now on October the 13th to end on the end of this year, but there are opportunities for that actually to retroactively end sooner. So again, applying for these particular programs, applying for forgiveness, and a few things other than that. There's some questions. We're kind of getting a little later in the webinar, so let me try to do another search. See if I can pull up my PPP by the numbers that was available earlier. Not so much now. Okay. Doing my share. Okay, here we go. Thank you. One thing I wanted to show you, a couple things, and this is kind of a collage of everything we've talked about, but really this goes back to the EIDL. This was actually from our PPP number 1 by the numbers, our original one back in, I believe it was April 1st of 2020. And it was our graphic illustration of basically getting a PPP loan. So we had a fictitious little business, Kelly's Grill. We had our 2019 numbers, and we showed basically underneath this how you could apply and receive PPP. Well, now I'm turning the tables on you. I'm using the same profit and loss for the EIDL program. And what I want to do is I want to show you how EIDL is calculated and how it can be differently. So if you see what's highlighted there, that's gross profit. That is the determination that the SBA uses with their algorithm in calculating the size of a EIDL loan. A COVID EIDL loan through their portal is basically going to be underwritten based on that number right there. And I'm going to show you two profit and loss statements, two very, very, very basic profit and loss statements. And this one shows obviously revenue of $800,000. Kelly's Grill is a food business, so there's food purchases and there's also payroll expenditures that are in our cost of sales. Management took the initiative and the directive that those purchases and actually annual payroll were actually the production part of actually generating those sales, and they should have been in cost of sales. Now, I'll tell you, honestly, I have seen literally hundreds of restaurants and food businesses, caterers, you name it, all atop the food and beverage businesses, every kind you can imagine. And I can tell you that it's treated differently. Is there a proper way of doing this? I really don't know. I don't know if there's some accounting standard that comes out, but I see tax returns that are reflected in this both ways. Now, the ironic thing about this is that if you are a food business, this is the way that is least advantageous for you to get a larger EIDL. So what it's showing is a smaller gross profit. By the same nature, let me show you the same form, but all I do is move the purchases and the payroll down here to operating expenses. For those of you that are familiar with a Schedule C, it's basically that way. You have the cost of goods sold at the top portion, and you have gross profit, which is line 7 on that Schedule C tax return that you show the IRS for your sole proprietorship business. And that's the way it works. You can actually do it in both places. I've seen them in both. So in this particular example, though, the purchases, the food purchases, and the cost of labor associated with producing that. Now up here, I wouldn't have administration probably. I wouldn't have maybe my marketing, but I would have my chefs, my sous chefs, my servers, since that payroll is all a cost of getting that food out. Honestly, you know, if you have an idea, if you've seen it one way or another or have some ruling on that, throw it in the chat for us. But for what I've seen is I see it done both ways, and it's the same numbers, but this person would actually, this version of Kelly's Grill would get a much higher EIDL. So some of these programs, it's kind of unique and different. It's how you show things and how things are representative. And it's going to probably have to be what's on your tax return already. I don't think you can go back and change that since you are supplying your tax returns. But it's really kind of shows, it's indicative of how you report right there. This really, I think, gives me a better graphical perspective. You know, you're in a restaurant, you know, it's food costs are oftentimes a third, probably higher now. Payroll costs were a third of your gross sales, probably higher now. But there's your gross profit, lower, and probably getting a smaller EIDL. You know, since we're talking about a food business, let me share with you kind of a tool that came out of the Association of Independent CPAs and the National Restaurant Association. I believe we shared this with you earlier, and it's if you received an RRF grant, a Restaurant Revitalization Fund grant. This is just really a really nice way of tracking this and gives you an idea, because this program is going to be more intensively tracked than a lot of others, and it shows you the ways that you can track the money that you received, and it shows you how the money that you have spent. See, my fear of all this is that you get these programs and you just put this money in your bank and you just live life and you go on with it. But there needs to be an accountability on how these funds were used in case you were ever audited, you were ever have to supply this information, or what have you. And then my last slide here is one that I used to share with you, and going back to EIDL and how we would kind of track particularly EIDL. So I showed you that September 30th, it was up to $270 billion. Going back to the beginning, 4 weeks earlier, it was at $262 billion. So for the month of September, it really increased only about $8 billion, and the number of loans. But now we're going to start seeing a tremendous amount of loan volume now that this has opened up and we're past this October 8th, and people are really starting to realize the benefits and what they can do with a larger EIDL loan. So gives us a little bit time for questions. I'm right on time, 12:55. So let's jump to your questions and maybe see if there's anything else in PowerPoint. Sorry for the presentation ills today. PowerPoint was not very productive, but when we'd quit sharing PowerPoint and go back to it, it actually would work fine. There's a little information on next week's guest speaker, Megan, and you'll see that bio next week if you're around here next week. And let's stop share and actually go to some of your questions. Let's hit the chat box first. What you're going to see in the chat box is you're going to see Maureen has put in some our one sheet that we shared with you today and other things for EIDL, including the phone numbers. And then also, if you're new, if you're looking at saying, hey, this EIDL thing is for me, I've got to do this and I've got to do it today, and I would recommend that. There is kind of your instructions for creating an online portal for the economic injury disaster loan through SBA. And remember, on all of our SBA stuff we talk about, do check and make sure from a fraud perspective that it's saying SBA.gov. There have been some other sites out there. One of them drops the V and it's SBA.go, and others that are trying to get your information. So please, please, please be very careful with your information, and you can always call SBA and ask them if they are requesting this information from you if you don't want to just share it Free Willy. Okay, so also in here are the EIDL FAQs, the email address for the requesting the increase in EIDL if you cannot do so in your portal, the EIDL portal, a little more information on the California Relief Grant. If you are one that applied and you have not received it, or you did not think you received that information, you can also call the Lindustry Call Center. And please call the Lindustry Call Center right there. Numbers are in your chat if you have any questions, or if you think that I would call them if you applied and you did not think you received the California Relief Grant. That's how widespread I think it has been available. So if you applied for the California Relief Grant, and I'm going to mention this next week too, and maybe the week after, but if you applied for the California Relief Grant and you did not think you were funded, call that call center and find out why. If you had an incomplete application, you can still go back and maybe fix that and still get funded at this time. Okay, so that's our chat. Thank you, Maureen, for all those very, very valuable and thorough posts and actual information that's in there. And if we move on to the questions and answers, let's jump up, and the first one being, will this recording be available to us via email? Yes, it will come out. There will be a recording. There'll be a list of all these links and some other information that'll come out to you and to anybody who actually signed up. So we send it to you even if you signed up and did not attend today. It'll be there. And our next question is, what if I applied for an EIDL loan but I don't see an application number that they usually provide? Should I reapply or wait? Well, let's handle that first part of the question. Is call the call center first and foremost. You do not want to go through a process of reapplying, because reapplying puts your same employer identification number into the system. And since there has been widespread fraud, that automatically throws it out and creates a delay of which the money could be gone by the time you get fixed. So true with anybody who's looking at the EIDL aspect of this, if you have put one application in, you need to try to get that fixed rather than reapplying for another one. And the second phase of this question, the second part, is what should I do if I'm unable to check the status of my application in the portal and doesn't have one that it shows or doesn't show one? Again, I would call the call center. It is open till 5 p.m. Pacific time, opens at 5 a.m. Pacific time. I would call them and see what they suggest. We have ran into a number of cases, a number of clients that have actually had their EIDL accounts closed, and they were trying to get an increase. So if you're trying to get a particular increase in closing and it had been closed out, you need to get it reopened. But I would always check with them before I would put any type of reapplication in there. They might tell you to reapply. They might say they didn't get it, or maybe something happened from a technology perspective. But if there's an application in there, and if you're not able to get your application number, and that should have also came to you via email. So again, around the time you applied, you might want to check your email, your junk email, your clutter email, your whatever email keeps it away from your inbox. Okay, that's all the time we got. Thank you so much, everyone. It's great being on here from Ridgecrest. You see the great map, and that's a map of ground ruptures from the earthquakes in Ridgecrest, the 6.4 and 7.1 earthquakes in 2019. And I've never done a webinar in front of a ground rupture map. It's pretty fascinating. But anyway, so much of that. What isn't fascinating is we're out of time, and I'll be back next week, and we'll be back for number 84. Thank you for tuning in. For Maureen Busherdang, our producer today, I'm Kelly Bearden. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye, everyone.